Okay, let's unpack something we all interact with daily: drinking water.
Right.
You walk down any supermarket aisle, and honestly, you're just bombarded with bottled water brands.
Yeah.
It's enough to make you wonder, beyond the clever marketing, what's really inside these bottles? Is there, like, a genuinely noticeable difference?
That's exactly the deep dive we're jumping into today. We've got our hands on a recent test.
Okay.
It put 10 popular bottled water brands head to head, analyzing them for, well, everything from the total amount of dissolved stuff in them.
Right, the TDS.
Yeah, we'll call that TDS to their pH, and a whole roster of other interesting bits and pieces.
Gotcha. And just to be clear, our goal isn't really to, like, declare a winner here.
No, not at all. It's more about equipping you, the listener, with the actual data.
So you can make smarter choices about what you're drinking.
Exactly. And we're looking at two main kinds of bottled water in this test, basically. You've got your spring water stuff that bubbles up naturally, and then purified water, which, goes through processing to remove impurities.
Right, makes sense. And who made the list? Which brands are we talking about?
Okay, so the 10 brands under the microscope are names you'll definitely recognize. Essentia, Fiji Water, Smart Water, Aquafina, Dasani, Evian, Nestle Pure Life, Zephyr Hills, Crystal Geyser, and even Walmart's purified water.
Okay, yeah, a real cross-section of what's out there on the shelves.
Okay.
So let's kick off with TDS, total dissolved solids. You said this test measured all the tiny dissolved particles, like 2 microns or smaller.
Yep, that's the measure. And just for some context, think about distilled water, practically nothing in there. Usually 0 to 1 part per million ppm.
Go.
Rainwater,
Got it.
maybe around 20 ppm. Then you jump way up to seawater, which is, packed with stuff, 20,000 to 40,000 ppm.
Whoa, big difference.
Huge. And for a benchmark, the tap water they tested in our source, that came in at 117 ppm.
117. Okay, so why do some people actually prefer low TDS water? What's the thinking there?
Well, one idea that's out there is that lower TDS might mean fewer potential contaminants.
Oh,
The thinking kind of goes, the more dissolved solids there are, maybe the higher the chance of something undesirable being in there too.
right. Less stuff overall means less bad stuff, potentially.
Potentially. Of course, water naturally has minerals, and some people like that for taste.
Sure.
But it's also true that a balanced diet will generally give you the minerals your body needs, so you don't necessarily need them from your water.
Makes sense. And this wasn't just about the total amount of stuff. They also used test strips, right, to check for specific things.
Exactly. They use strips to sniff out specific things like lead, sulfates, nitrates, and also whether the water was more acidic or alkaline. That's the pH level.
Okay, cool. So let's get to the results. What did the TDS numbers actually look like for these 10 brands?
Well, the results showed a pretty dramatic spread, actually. Yeah. Aquafina registered the absolute lowest TDS, just 3 ppm.
3? Wow, it's incredibly low, almost like distilled water you mentioned.
Pretty much. Then, on the other complete end of the scale, you had Evian. That had the highest at 298 ppm.
Okay, nearly 300. That likely reflects its source, right, being a natural spring water with minerals.
That's most likely it, yeah. It's sourced from a specific spring, so it picks up minerals along the way.
That's a huge gap between 3 and 298. So what about the rest of the pack? Where did they fall?
Okay, so Essentia clocked in at 58 ppm. Crystal Geyser was 116 ppm.
Which, wait, you said the tap water was 117 ppm.
Exactly. Strikingly similar, right?
Yeah, virtually identical. Okay, continue.
Nestle Pure Life had 32 ppm. Dasani was 23 ppm. Fiji Water came in at 148 ppm. Zephyr Hills 160 ppm.
But,
Walmart's purified water was 30 ppm, and Smart Water had 25 ppm.
So yeah, a real range there, from almost nothing in Aquafina to nearly 300 in Evian, with others scattered all over.
A real mix.
It's interesting to see that variation. Now, I think the EPA sets a limit, right? Something like 500 ppm for TDS in drinking water?
That's right. 500 ppm is the secondary standard, more of a guideline for taste and aesthetics.
And it seems like everything tested, even the tap water and Evian, was well below that threshold.
Yeah, all well within that guideline.
Okay, let's shift gears then. What about pH? What did those test strips tell us about how acidic or alkaline these waters were?
Right, pH. So for most of the purified water brands, that's your Essentia, Nestle, Dasani, Zephyr Hills, Walmart, Aquafina, and Smart Water, the pH levels were actually pretty consistent.
Oh, yeah. What range?
They were all hovering between about 6.6 and 7.
So pretty close to neutral pH, which is 7.
Exactly, pretty much right there.
Okay, nothing too wild there for the purified ones. But I seem to remember Essentia makes some pretty bold claims about its pH, doesn't it?
Yes, that's a really interesting point. Essentia markets itself as having a pH of 9.5 or higher.
9.5, that's quite alkaline.
It is, and they claim this alkalinity offers various benefits. But what's particularly noteworthy is that their packaging even suggests standard test strips aren't accurate for their water.
Because in its purity or something?
That's the claim, yeah. But this independent test using strips, it placed Essentia's pH squarely in that 6.6 to 7 range.
The same range as the other purified waters.
Exactly the same range.
Huh. Well, that certainly raises some eyebrows about those marketing claims versus the test result.
It does make you think.
So what about the pH levels of the other waters, the spring ones?
Crystal Geyser and Evian both registered around 7.3, so leaning just slightly alkaline.
Okay.
Fiji was a little lower, kind of in the 7 to 7.1 range, still basically neutral to slightly alkaline.
And the tap water, for comparison?
But the tap water tested had a pH of 6.9, so just a hair on the acidic side of neutral.
Got it. So some variation there, and definitely that disconnect with Essentia's claims stands out. Okay, next up, water hardness. What did the test reveal about that? Is that related to the dissolved solids?
Yeah, water hardness primarily refers to the concentration of specific minerals, mainly calcium and magnesium.
Right, the stuff that can cause scale buildup sometimes.
Exactly. So in this test, 8 of the 10 bottled water brands actually showed fairly similar hardness levels. They were between 75 and 85 ppm.
Okay, so most were in the same ballpark. Any outliers?
Yeah, there were 2 exceptions. Essentia was softer, down at 50 ppm, and Crystal Geyser was also softer at 60 ppm.
Interesting. And the tap water?
The tested tap water had a hardness of 80 ppm, so right in the middle of that main group of 8 brands.
Okay, so for most of these waters, you're looking at comparable levels of those particular minerals, calcium and magnesium.
Pretty much, yeah. Not a huge difference in hardness for most, but Essentia and Crystal Geyser definitely stood out as being, well, softer.
Good to know. Now, what about sulfate levels? I know some people pay attention to the mineral content, maybe for health reasons or taste.
Right, sulfates. This is where we started to see some more pronounced differences in the mineral makeup. You had Nestle Pure Life, Dasani, Zephyr Hills, and Smart Water all showing higher sulfate levels. They were ranging from about 1,200 to 1,300 ppm.
Wow, that sounds quite high compared to the TDS numbers we saw earlier.
It is a specific measure, yeah. Then you had Walmart's Purified Water, Aquafina, Essentia, and Crystal Geyser with slightly lower levels, more in the 1,000 to 1,100 ppm range.
Okay, so still pretty substantial, but a noticeable step down. A bit of a split there.
Definitely a split.
So what if someone is specifically trying to, say, limit their sulfate intake for dietary reasons?
Good question. If that's a specific concern for you, then 2 brands really stood out. Evian had a very low sulfate level, just 20 ppm.
20, compared to over 1,000.
Exactly. And Fiji was also quite low, at 50 ppm.
Okay.
So yeah, Evian and Fiji had significantly lower sulfate levels compared to the majority of the other brands tested. That's a really key takeaway if you're watching sulfate consumption.
Definitely good to know for people tracking that. What about sodium chloride? You know, plain old salt. Any surprises there?
But what's interesting is that across the board, all 10 brands had very low sodium chloride levels, mostly in the 0 to 20 ppm range.
So generally not salty tasting then?
Not really, no. However, there was a slight difference. Crystal Geyser, Evian, Fiji, and Zephyr Hills did show slightly higher levels than the others.
How much higher?
They were between 95 and 100 ppm.
Okay. Still not massive, but definitely higher than the others.
Right, compared to the other brands, which were mostly below, say, 10 to 15 ppm.
Gotcha. And the tap water?
The tested tap water was also very low in sodium chloride, between 0 and 5 ppm.
Huh. So generally low salt across the board, but a few brands, including some spring waters, had a bit more of a bump compared to the rest in the tap sample.
Exactly. A modest increase in those few cases.
Now, the test didn't stop there, did it? It cast a pretty wide net, looking for a bunch of other things, potential contaminants.
Yeah, they tested for quite a list. Things like hydrogen sulfide, iron, copper, lead, manganese, total chlorine, free chlorine, nitrate, zinc, and fluoride.
Okay, quite comprehensive. And what was the verdict there?
Well, the reassuring news really is that for all those things, the levels were found to be negligible
Across all the bottled waters.
across all 10 bottled waters and the tap water sample they tested.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's certainly good to hear.
Yeah. For instance, the estimated fluoride level in the tap water was around 1 ppm, which is pretty typical, often intentionally added for dental health.
Right.
The total alkalinity of the tap water was 85 ppm. And the levels of chlorine, which is used for disinfection, were quite low total chlorine at zero point 0.8 ppm and free chlorine at zero point 0.2 ppm.
So across that whole list of potential nasties, basically everything was well within safe limits or negligible for all the brands, and the tap water held up well too.
Absolutely. It really kind of underscores that, at least based on these specific measures, the tap water in this particular test wasn't inherently bad or unsafe compared to the bottled option.
That's a really important point. So, okay, we've really dug into the TDS, the pH levels, hardness, sulfate, sodium chloride, and a whole range of other potential impurities in these 10 very popular bottled water brands.
Mhm.
And we even got that glimpse at a sample of tap water as a comparison point.
And I think what becomes really clear from all this data is that the whole idea of a single best bottled water, it's really a myth.
Yeah, it seems that way.
It just boils down to what you, the individual consumer, prioritize. Is it like ultra low TDS because you value that kind of purity?
Or maybe you're looking for a specific pH level, even if, as we saw, the marketing claims don't always perfectly align with independent testing.
Exactly. Or are you trying to manage your intake of certain minerals like sulfates? These are now hopefully more informed choices you can make based on actual data, not just the label.
Right. And it might be really enlightening for you listening to, check out the water quality report for your own local water supply. You might actually be surprised how it stacks up against some of these bottled options.
Definitely worth looking into. Which brings us to a kind of fascinating final point for you to ponder. Considering all these variations we've just talked about, the big differences in dissolved solids, the pH levels, the mineral content like sulfates, what single factor, when you think about it, strikes you as the most surprising or maybe the most important when you're choosing your drinking water?
That's a good question.
And maybe more importantly, why? Why does that particular factor stand out to you? It's definitely some food for thought the next time you're standing there facing that massive wall of bottled water choices.